All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Three View Mirror. That 1 hour we spend together every week where we throw back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s and discuss the amazing pop culture topics that existed back in the day. Every single week, one of us, me, Chelle, or Chris, come to you with three topics that the other two have no idea about what's going to come out of their mouth. But the cool thing is, throughout those three topics is a hidden connection, a mystery that you have to solve using whatever means you have available, your memory, your wits, your Encyclopedia Britannica, your decodering that you got out of a Cracker Jack box, whatever you got available, and see if you can figure out the mystery connection before the two of us do. I'm John Catridis, better known as Gen X Jono, across the World Wide Web, and I am joined with my two co-hosts, Chris.
I'm Chris Clues, keynote speaker and author, and I'm going to try this because I just saw that if I do a peace sign, I get balloons.
I'm jealous. No, I'm Rochelle, by the way. I'm Gen X Chelle, but I'm now jealous of your balloons.
This is the Three View Mirror.
The two of you are going to love the three topics that I chose today. Are you ready to hear them?
I'm ready.
I am. Let's do it.
Chuck Norris, Mr. T, and Hulk Hogan.
Love it.
I figured this was so a boys topic. This is such a man topic. I mean, girls too, I get it. But I knew you would. Do you have a lot to say about these three?
Absolutely. 100%. Fireworks are going off.
I probably have less to say about it than you would think, but I'll do my best to keep up. I think Chris will probably run the show on this one.
All right, so we'll start with Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris, icon. The first thing I think of is the jokes that go around the internet of Chuck Norris. Have you all heard the Chuck Norris jokes? The things that, like, Chuck Norris is so tough that when he looks in the mirror, the glass shatters because nothing comes between Chuck Norris and Chuck Norris. Like, and I'm a terrible joke deliverer. Chuck Norris once lit a fart and now it's called the sun. You know what I mean? He has these jokes that fly around the internet about how tough he is. And truly his list of films and television all very much related to his martial arts general badassery.
Yeah, I'm a huge Chuck Norris fan. And, I think about he was one of, Bruce Lee being kind of the pioneer, at least on a large scale, when it came to martial arts characters, action heroes, whatever you want to call them, in movies. Chuck Norris was right behind that. And with Missing in Action is the one that I remember first. He had I think there was 3 of the Missing in Action movies. But my friends and I all wanted to be Chuck Norris coming up out of the water with the machine gun, or even we all had nunchucks. We made nunchucks out of broom. We took a broomstick, cut it into pieces, and then took a shoestring, tied it, and put like nails in on the end and made our own nunchucks. And we all have brain damage from it. But it was fun nonetheless because we were trying to be Chuck.
It explains a lot. It really... I saw John's face. John's like, yeah, I could really jump in here and make any comment that you wanted to.
I never saw any of the Missing in Action movies. I don't think I've ever seen a Chuck Norris movie. One thing I remember, I read a lot of comic books as a kid, and Chuck Norris did these comic book ads a lot for different things. And it would be in the pages between when they were trying to sell us sea monkeys, or, there were the Hostess cupcake ads that were always in there with the superheroes selling those. Chuck Norris had these like action jeans that he sold that, they had extra stretch so you could kick and you could do all these things in there. And he was always selling them. And I remember wanting a pair because my tough skin jeans that my mom bought me, it had like no give to them at all. I couldn't even bend my knees to tie my shoes. I was walking around like I'm in a suit of armor, and I just kept reading about these action jeans that actually could bend knees, but never allowed to have them.
Knee patches were a real thing then, because that is exactly, I can remember having knee patches, but as a girl I wore tough skins, come to think of it. I didn't have Jordache. We weren't a Jordache family. We were a
Jordache. No, I actually did a video the other day, and I was talking about Gen X disappointments, and one of them was a disappointment when your mother considered Chick jeans designer jeans, or Wrangler jeans designer jeans.
Or the Lee versus the Levi's. Remember?
Oh
Lee?
Yeah. Lee sucked ass compared to Levi's. Levi was where it was at. Did I just say sucked ass on our podcast?
The Lee jeans. I remember. I think they sold them at Kmart. I'm literally almost 100% positive, because if you didn't get your clothes from designer places or the big department stores, then Kmart was the place. I mean, there were other smaller stores like it, but it was Kmart.
403 Oak Street, Cincinnati, Ohio. Kmart. No,
and Chuck Norris is still relevant today, to bring us back to Chuck Norris. Not to get into any kind of political discussion, because we avoid that like the proverbial plague. But, his Twitter page, whether you read it to argue with him or because you agree with him, regardless, he's still out there. He's still relevant. I think he still is an advocate of fitness and working out. And that was another thing I remember of him. He was always, an advocate of fitness for kids and staying in shape and doing all of that. So he's still very much in the pop culture scene today.
So Chuck Norris, I know Chuck Norris movies. I grew up, I knew all about Chuck Norris. I've seen probably bits and pieces of a ton of his movies, but I can never say that as a female, and my dad wasn't into it. So I never really sat down and said, I'm going to watch this action movie, whatever it may be. Some of the karate and the whatever kind of martial arts that he knew, I don't even know what they were. I wasn't into it as a girl.
I saw Terminator, I saw Predator, I saw the Rambo movies, I saw a ton of that. I don't know what it was about Chuck Norris specifically, or you said it was his Missing in Action. Was that his thing?
Missing in Action and Delta Force were the big ones for him.
Never saw a minute of either of those.
Yeah, they're good. They're good. They're fun. And, I didn't realize either that he was also in Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. So, I don't know the story behind that. If maybe that was what propelled him, that he spent some time around Bruce Lee and then, wanted to be like that as well. It'd be interesting to know. I don't know that backstory. But he also had a really successful television show as well, which is Walker, Texas Ranger, which went for 8 or 9 or even 10 seasons, maybe. I'm not really sure, but it was on for quite a while. It was a popular.
I think it was 8 seasons on CBS.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then of course he just was, I say recently, it wasn't 2005, which is terrifying, but I can't believe that the movie Dodgeball came out 19 years ago and he had a really little cameo in Dodgeball.
And he was a cameo as himself, was he not? Yes. If I remember correctly. And John, you have to look up the Chuck Norris jokes. They're absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, I've never heard those either.
It came out as a thing. Somebody wrote a book about it even, and he was going to sue, but then eventually he embraced it. And then he started making like television appearances, like if he had to go on the Letterman show or whatever. And he started reading off some of the jokes and memes that were made about him, probably since at least 2005, whenever it was. People loved making those jokes. I wrote a bunch of them down because my husband even sends them to me because he's like, oh, this is too funny. Chuck Norris was born. He drove his mom home from the hospital. When asked how many push-ups he could do, he said all of them. Chuck Norris once made a Happy Meal cry. So, he just, they're fun.
They are fun. Yeah. They're totally like, and they work with Chuck Norris because they feel like such 80s jokes, honestly. Like it seems like something that would have been floated, even though they came much later. And John, if you're curious to learn a little bit more about, because you said you watched the Rambos and the Schwarzeneggers. And so the Bruce Lee documentary, Be Water, which is a really great documentary that came out a few years ago. They interviewed Chuck Norris in that, and you get to learn a little bit more about him. He was an interesting guy, but I can understand why, because I looked up his movies and I can understand why maybe you didn't see some of them, because the titles, you've got Hellbound, A Force of One, The Octagon, Breaker, The Cutter, Firewalker, The Hitman, Hero Terror.
They all sound like direct-to-video movie titles.
Code of Silence, which actually was not bad.
I watched Breaker Breaker. I that one I did watch. It was a like Breaker Breaker one night. It was some sort of a trucking thing. I vaguely remember it as a kid.
Yeah, Invasion USA. I mean, so, but I would say you would probably enjoy a Missing in Action or Delta Force. They are definitely 80s action movies through and through. They couldn't be mistaken for anything else.
You know, I do think it's funny. I've done content around frontier shows that we watched as kids, even into the 90s. When was Walker, Texas Ranger on? I would guess late 80s, mid 90s.
Mid
It was
90s.
90s. I don't have the exact date, but it was 90s.
So there was that. There was Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Of course, before that, growing up, we had Kung Fu, which was a Western, and you wouldn't think it listening to the title. Little House on the Prairie. The closest we come to that today is maybe Yellowstone, which is technically a Western, but set in the present. We had a lot more television that threw back to those days. I don't know if it was because they were selling to our sense of the Oregon Trail that we played growing up. I don't know what it was, but there was a lot of that back then, and now there's none of it.
Well, now, I mean, I hate to say this. You're always the one that's always bringing up the how old were people thing.
Stop it. No need.
But now I think that they go back and the television shows are they're set in the 90s, and that was the same. That was like, yeah.
No, because we were going back over.
80s.
In 1980, we would have been going back to the when was Little House on the Prairie set? It was like the 1800s, wasn't it? Maybe
okay,
not.
but still, they're not going that far back because they're not going to the 50s. Nobody cares about the 50s anymore.
Not the 50s. It was the 1800s. It'd be like going back to Howard Taft's time now or whatever. William Taft, William Howard Taft. Anyway, no, that's not the reason. It's not that it's too far back. It's that I don't think kids have the patience to watch a time when technology didn't exist.
Period dramas.
Yeah, they're like, no, they didn't have television. Where's the TikTok dancing?
Well, I think if you asked a lot of kids in the 80s too, though, that were like my stepbrother and I and our friends, like we'd go into the woods and play war. And I think I've talked about this before. We'd actually like take prisoners of war on the other team. It was really insane what we did, but we were playing war. And I think the thing about Chuck Norris for all of us was that we did, love Rambo. In fact, it was just on the other day. I texted my stepbrother a picture. He was watching it too, and he ordered a survival knife while he was watching it. I'm like, I'm sure you're not the only one. But Chuck Norris seemed more, I don't want to say attainable is not the right word because he was like a big, strong guy. But Schwarzenegger was just this massive human being. Mm-hmm. And Stallone was Rocky. And I feel like they were almost out of touch for us, but we all felt like we could be Chuck Norris. And so we really tried to emulate him from Missing in Action and some of those other movies.
Because you're saying like he was the tough guy, but he wasn't the biggest tough guy. He didn't have the girth, so to speak, in his arms and his body to say, hey, I'm the biggest, baddest in the room.
Yes. And I also think that his movies, although they were the big 80s action movies that most were very unrealistic in terms of how many people one guy could take out, but his felt a little more, I don't know, reasonable, I guess, than, in Commando and Schwarzenegger's running across a field with a machine gun and he takes out 45 people while they're all shooting at him. And they're shooting RPGs and missiles and all kinds of stuff. And somehow he avoids them and kills everybody. So I think maybe it was more realistic for us. I don't know.
He just takes a move and uses his leg and he just knocks the bullets straight out of the air. Chuck Norris, you can't fire at him because he's going to knock the bullets right out of the air.
And he's got the action genes on. So, I mean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He did do Gene's commercial, right? Were we talking about that earlier? The tight jeans?
Where were you 10 minutes ago?
No, I just said that you mentioned that earlier.
Did you really just ask if he did Gene commercial? I mean,
he must be doing this.
I caught myself.
Didn't he do Gene's commercials? I think they were action. Yeah, Chris, he did.
But they weren't.
He had the Total Gym too. Do you remember?
Yeah.
He had the total gym.
Oh, the infomercial.
He was an early, I remember him in earlier infomercials. There's certain infomercials that stand out in your mind. There was like the ShamWow guy,
Yeah.
and then there was the, the do you remember the ShamWow guy?
That guy was an absolute mess of a human being outside of the infomercial.
Yes, he
No,
was.
I always think of Tony Little. Remember him?
Yes,
With the ponytail, and that would have been a movie. Put Tony Little against Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and our dude here, and that would have been something I would have watched. But anyway, in about 15 minutes, you can ask us if we remembered that he was actually in an infomercial. Chris, take notes and write it down.
I wrote that down. I caught myself like right away. I was like, "Oh shit, we already talked about this."
Oh, we already talked about that. So have we talked 15 minutes about, or have we talked about Chuck Norris enough here?
I think so.
Yeah,
I got nothing more to add.
Okay, so our next topic then, as we slide right into the next topic, is Mr. T. And, Mr. T for me was an icon of the time. He was one of the first people that I remember that I knew what his look was so genuinely unique that you just knew it was Mr. T. His voice, everything about him. He was, if you ask me, a master of personal branding. He knew what he wanted to be known as, and he was unmistakable.
I mean, he has to be one of the top, 10 celebrities, I think, of all time in terms of creating a brand around who he was. And for me, as I think I've mentioned in past episodes, Clubber Lang is one of my favorite characters of all time. It's just they're just one of those characters that nobody else could have played. He was perfectly cast and brilliant in that role. I mean, beyond, A-Team and some of the other things he did, for me, he'll always be Clubber Lang.
That was Rocky III. And what came out of Rocky III for him, one of the most famous things that Mr. T was known for. Do you know what came out of it?
His cereal?
Well, the cereal, you know what? The cereal was surprisingly in kid taste bud years, it was pretty good. So, but no, a famous line, Mr. T's famous line.
Pain?
I pity
the fool.
I pity the fool. Yeah.
Yeah. I always go back to the, what's your prediction for the fight? My prediction? Pain.
Yes. But I pity the fool came from there, and it was like his trademark thing, the gold necklaces, the mustache, what, I don't know what you would call whatever he had on his face, mustache beard combo, Fu Manchu. I don't know what was it.
The thing I loved about Mr. T wasn't his on-screen persona. It wasn't the characters he played. It wasn't B.A. Baracus or Clubber Lang. The man was the sweetest, softest hard ass on earth. He did a rap on Mother's Day for being good to your mom. He worked with the First Lady Nancy Reagan on the Just Say No campaign for kids to not get into drugs. I mentioned before, that is the world's most pathetic, lowest effort to keep children off drugs conceivable. Back in the 80s, all they were willing to throw at us was telling us to say no. That's the plan. How do we get kids off drugs? Tell them to say no.
Tell them to say no.
That said, he went and visited kids, and he did a lot of work with her. And interviews that he had always seemed to go back to how blessed he felt. He wore sneakers, so he had like $10 gajillion worth of gold around his neck. And yet he had sneakers that he wore that were duct taped together. And he said that's to keep him grounded, to keep, regardless of everything else, you'd look at his feet and he had these sneakers that were duct taped together. And, people would ask him about him. He's like, that's just to remind myself of, where I came from and just how lucky I am to be where I am.
Well, whenever I was doing the research on him, because I didn't know a lot about his background, basically he grew up with 12 siblings, I believe, 12 siblings in a 3-room house or 3-room apartment. And that was in Chicago. And one of the reasons that he had chosen the name Mr. T was because he had heard all his life, everybody called all the male figures in his family, it was always boy, boy, boy. Lack of respect for the black men that they were. And he always said that he wanted to become, now his dad left and he became T, but he wanted Mr. T, so that no matter what anybody did, they would always address him as Mr. First, and gain that respect in that way. But then, like you said, he did children's music and rap and a little bit of everything.
He also had two of the coolest character names ever. When John said them both together, I'm like, wow. B.A. Baracus, Clubber Lang. Like, can you do better than that? Those are two pretty cool character names. And they
Along
fit
with Mr. T. Mr. T.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very good.
They fit him perfectly.
Now, Chelle did the research, so I'm not asking her, and I didn't know. I had to look it up. Do you know what his real name is, Chris?
I want to say that his first name starts with a B, but I could be mistaken. No, go ahead.
Chelle?
What is it?
Lawrence Terrard.
Oh, really? Okay.
Lawrence, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I did happen to write that one down.
And when you say he's, branding, that's it, because he is his brand. No one that I knew his name was Lawrence.
I would say, and again, I go back to the 80s like I always do, but there were some significant brands. People created these amazing brands. And I know that it happened a little bit before. There were certainly in music, not as much in movies, I don't think. I think, a lot of times people just went by their name or whatever their stage name was, but it wasn't something that was packaged up in a completely different way. But he was part of Mr. T and Boy George and Madonna. And you think about these people that were just great entertainers, but even better marketers. And they just understood what people were looking for, what they wanted, and how to package themselves in a way that everybody would embrace. Mm-hmm. And there's something to be said for that, because we do see that today to some extent with different people. LL Cool J is another one. Mm-hmm. It's just they were so good at taking themselves and saying, I want to be a brand. I want to be bigger than my name. I want to be a brand. And when people think of me, they only think of that brand, but that's going to become my name. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, Lawrence Terrard doesn't exist. And his brand was so big. He was so big that he could go and guest star. And John talked about this in a previous episode too, where like the Charlie's Angels went on to, or the Bionic Woman and the $6 Million Man, where they went on each other's shows and they were the characters. They weren't Farrah Fawcett and Jacqueline Smith. They went on the Love Boat as Charlie's Angels and so on. Mr. T was able to do that. He was able to appear as Mr. T, and everybody knew who Mr. T was. So he could guest star on anything, and he did guest star on a lot of stuff. We always talk about the guest stars in the 80s. He was on Different Strokes. There was a list of shows that he had been on.
I think he was even on Punky Brewster, which I didn't watch, but I seemed to, like, in my mind, I'm seeing the promo. You know how they'd always promo the shows a week ahead of time. And I'm like, I think he was on. And you're right. He was always Mr. T, because if ever there was someone that was 1000% typecast, and in this case, maybe intentionally, it was Mr. T, because there was no chance in hell he was ever going to show up as the artist on the Hallmark movie next week. He was Mr. T no matter what.
Yeah.
He wasn't playing any other parts.
And it surprised me sometimes that you think of the list of things and films and movies that some of them have been in. All three of the people that we're talking about here today, the Chuck Norris, the Mr. T, the Hulk Hogan, their lists are very, very long. They even have video games. Chuck Norris had his own video game. You know what I'm saying? Mr. T almost had a video game. Like they all were just that iconic and big in their time.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I'm a huge Mr. T fan, and it does go back mainly for me to I just love Clubber Lang. I don't know. There's something that character. When people ask me, like, what are your top characters from movies? And Clubber Lang is always in that discussion. It just fit him. I don't want to say it fit him perfectly. He fit it perfectly. Like, he just said, this is who I am, in the same way that he said, I'm Mr. T, and everything I do, to John's point, is going to be Mr. T. And I think that Different Strokes episode, I could be wrong, but I feel like I remember seeing it, and it had something to do with the Gooch, the bully that was picking on Arnold. And I think he came and like helped him with something about it. Just
That sounds right. I was going to say bully before you said it. I don't remember the episode, but but that was another thing with him. And again, just working with kids and he always had those NBC promos too, like One to Grow On. I remember there was an NBC One to Grow On, and there's Mr. T, and he's there just saying, don't be a bully and don't do this and don't do that. And, he started he was a bouncer, I think.
Yeah.
I think he was discovered as a bouncer, and just really humble, simple beginnings, but never lost that ability to ground himself. The chains were to remind himself where he got to. The name was to remind himself that he had value and worth and demanded respect. And the sneakers would remind, he kept every bit of himself through his journey. And I think that's rare.
I do think that's rare. I think that's rare with the world.
The only other thing I'll say about Mr. T is, and we've mentioned like these larger than life, like Rambo, Arnold Schwarzenegger was huge, and these big guys. I would have guessed that Lawrence, Mr. T, was probably 6 foot tall, just towering giant. He was only 5'10". And that's, in the grand scheme of things, when you think of these big people that play he played a giant. He played, send him in, send B.A. Baracus, 5'10".
But I could see that though, because I remember watching the A-Team, and he didn't strike me as towering over anybody. I think I knew somehow that he wasn't that tall.
Yeah, they did something in Rocky 3 to make him look, I think, a little bit taller than.
Yeah, because he went nose to nose with
either.
Stallone. He went nose to nose with Stallone, so there was some ramping going on there.
Well, but Stallone himself is short.
Stallone had to they made Clubber Lang, I think, look bigger in the long shots. I was reading somehow they did with his shoes, and then they had to actually put Stallone on something to get nose to nose with Clubber Lang.
Isn't that crazy, the amount of work they do? I remember they did that a lot with Tom Cruise in movies too. Top Gun, there's the iconic scene where Kelly McGillis and him are meeting behind a couch, and they're gonna have that big kiss moment. And behind the couch, there's actually a ramp so that as Tom Cruise was walking, by the time he got to the apex of the ramp, he could kiss Kelly McGillis.
Without looking up?
Without looking up.
I don't know if that scene would have been the same if he was...
I'm sure it would not have been the same.
So as we smoothly transition over then to Hulk Hogan, what do you two have to say about Hulk Hogan? Another branding master of his own personal brand.
Also had a cereal, correct?
I don't know about
People can
that one.
fact check us. I think he did. But for me, it's WrestleMania. Come on.
Yeah.
That's it. That's Hulk Hogan. I do remember my immigrant parents being confused, and Hulk Hogan had a set of WrestleMania action figures that I asked for one year, and I ended up with an incredible Hulk action figure. And my mom was very adamant that she had gotten it right this time. Because when I'm like, Mom, you got it wrong, she was very annoyed. No, he say Hulk, and he say Hulk.
I love your Greek mom voice.
Yeah.
She's downstairs. If she hears me, I'm going to get my ass kicked.
Still to this day, 50 plus, but what was your last birthday? 54, right?
54 yesterday.
54 years old and still kind of afraid that your mom's
Oh,
going
no, not kind of. I'm still petrified.
So you're going to get the full name treatment from downstairs?
Listen, legal names when you're a Greek kid takes too long. By that time, their anger's abated.
So Hulk Hogan, Terry Gene Bollea is his actual name. Yeah, I that one kind of surprised me a little bit too, or Bollea, whatever it is. He's not Terry Gene Bollea. He is Hulk Hogan.
When I think of Hulk Hogan, obviously the wrestler, but I'm going to go back to Rocky 3 because he was Thunder Lips in Rocky 3. And played the wrestler that they're supposed to be having the charity event, and he picks up Rocky and he slams him in the ring, and everybody thinks that he's going to get killed. And that character is one, obviously, I mean, beyond just the fact that he was Hulk Hogan, the character Thunder Lips is the first thing I think of when I think of Hulk Hogan.
And I kind of knew you would know that. I was going to bring that up about him making a guest appearance along with Mr. T. It's a little minor connection. I mean, it's not the connection, but it's not the connection. But him making a guest appearance on Rocky 3, that was definitely a role for him. Chuck Norris never made it to Rocky 3. Well, as far as I know anyway.
Did he ever act with Sylvester Stallone in something else?
You know what? Yes, something. What did I have here? Yes, I do.
Was it Nighthawks? Nighthawks, maybe? When I think of Hulk Hogan beyond Thunder Lips, of course, the wrestler, but it also reminds me again, and I know I'm like a broken record when it comes to 80s pop culture, but that time, again, we talked about Mr. T and all these like great brands that people created of themselves. Well, the wrestlers were doing it too. And I actually caught a little WWE the other night out of curiosity, and it's nowhere close to what it used to be when you had Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant and King Kong Bundy and the Road Warriors and Jimmy Superfly Snuka and all of these these guys that created these brands, these literal
Roddy Piper.
Roddy Piper. I mean,
yeah.
You could just go on and on. There were so many amazing ones. Sergeant Slaughter, the Iron Sheik. And there was Hulk Hogan. Again, to your point, he's Hulk Hogan. He's nothing else. Mr. T, same thing. And it's interesting. Chuck Norris is Chuck Norris. Like he's just he's just who he is. I mean, that's another thing that I loved about it was that I really enjoyed wrestling when I was a kid because the personalities were so huge and they were so over the top and they all had these great backstories. And, not sure exactly what Hulk Hogan's backstory was, but he was the guy we were all cheering for until we weren't. And then he became like a bad guy for a little while. And I don't know. I think that's a great thing about 80s pop culture where these massive brands were created out of human beings and it wasn't even who they really were, their name in the sense.
Yeah. I mean, his name sounds not, he doesn't look like what did I say it was? Terry. He doesn't look like a Terry. He also appeared, he has a huge list of shows and films that he's been in or appeared on, maybe not as big as like Mr. T was just prolific in all of that. He had probably the biggest name shows, I would say, like with the A-Team, he had his own show. But Hulk Hogan he appeared as Hulk Hogan. Like he didn't go on as somebody else. His character was branded so well that he appeared on as a guest star as Hulk Hogan.
So about 3 or 4 months ago, you mentioned Sergeant Slaughter. I actually met him. He came into the restaurant that I work in. He lives in the area or has kids in the area. And he was 1,000% Sergeant Slaughter. I mean, you knew it the minute you looked at him. It's kind of funny. I know that if Chuck Norris walked in, I'd know it was him instantly. I know if Mr. T walked in, I would know it was him instantly. Hulk Hogan had this thing where he takes off the bandana. If he shaved down the Fu Manchu and walked in, I probably wouldn't know it was him. He's one that he developed a specific look for his brand, but outside of him being in the brand, he could just be any other guy. And I think that's kind of cool. That's a divergence from those three.
Yeah, that you could. I think I could see that.
Although he's tall.
Yeah, he's 6'7", I believe.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, he's 6'7". Yeah.
7 or 6'8". Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he doesn't look that, right? That's the crazy thing.
No, he doesn't look that tall.
Like he's 6'7".
And now I got to watch Rocky again because I mean, he must have towered. What's Stallone, like 4'6"? Sorry, Mr. Stallone.
I don't think he's much more than 5'8", honestly.
I don't think he is either. And again, I'm sorry, Mr. Stallone.
Well, he's still great. No, it doesn't matter. He's still awesome. But yeah, I think he's I think he's 6'7" or 6'8". I mean, and he does. And again, to your point, John, like Mr. T looked like he should be 6'7" or 6'8", but Hulk Hogan looks like, I'd be 6 foot. It wouldn't surprise me if he was 6 foot tall, but not much.
And he did things with kids too. He had a band. He actually had a song that was, I read it somewhere that it was like if the Billboard Top 40 had a kids section, it was like on the kids section of like songs. And, so he focused a lot on that. He's a religious man as well. He was, both him and Mr. T were basically born again Christian, and you could kind of see it in their bits of charity work, especially Mr. T, I would say. And I wasn't a wrestler. It's funny how iconic. I don't know if wrestling is as iconic now, but in the 80s, it really was an iconic thing, to the point where I never watched wrestling. I didn't know anybody that watched wrestling, but yet I knew who the Iron Sheik and Roddy Piper were, and I can't even think of some of the other ones right now, but we knew their names, and that in itself is an iconic thing with them. And
I didn't
he was
watch
a wrestler for a while.
Mr. T was wrestling. I didn't watch wrestlers. I didn't watch WrestleMania. I didn't watch what was then the WWF. But I wanted the toy. I wanted like the action figures. I wanted the ring so I could, play with that. And to your point, knew every one of the characters involved in it because they were prolific. They went beyond the television screen and entered into pop culture. And everyone had a favorite wrestler. Whether you watched wrestling or not, there was one that stood out and was, what's your favorite wrestler? Who's the one that I think everyone had one.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it was based on their look too, because you would see the promos on television, even if you didn't watch them, and they were like the original smack talkers of TV. Like, you didn't see promos of people smack talking each other very much prior to that, if you think about it.
Yeah, Muhammad Ali. I mean, he was the, almost like, I guess, the OG smack talker in terms of how good he was on his feet. And I would imagine that a lot of those guys probably got some inspiration from Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, I'm looking at my notes here. If there was anything that, because there's a lot of small connections, by the way, between these three. There's tons of connections in between. I'm wondering too, as we head into the connection between, so we've gone over Chuck Norris, we've gone over Mr. T, and we've gone over Hulk Hogan, and as I was looking, there are a ton of those small connections. Can you think of even the small connections, besides maybe the big connection that I had in mind, that connect any of them together, even if it's just two of them? Because there was a lot.
Well, I mean, we've talked about the fact that both Clubber Lang and Thunder, I mean, you had both Mr. T and Hulk Hogan in Rocky movies. All three of the actors have worked with Sylvester Stallone. All three of the actors were in some aspect, whether it was martial arts or wrestling, physical fitness regiment. All three of the wrestlers all three of them were into philanthropy and had their causes. And all three were larger than life brands from the 80s. I mean, those are the small connections I see running through the entire discussion.
Yeah. I mean, every single one of those was there. You can't deny it. And John, you had that grin on your face about Sylvester Stallone, because you say the movie that had Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone.
I don't remember the title. I see it. I don't remember the title.
It was Expendables. Expendables 2? Expendables 2. Yes.
Yeah, it was one of those that I literally can see it, but I never saw the movie. I read the back. That was one that I'm in Blockbuster Video, and I'm like looking at the back of it, like, do I want to rent this movie? That's the only recollection I have of that movie.
Yeah, no, Expendables 2 is new.
Yeah.
Like, that's a newer movie.
Oh, what am I thinking of then? There's
I don't
another.
know.
I bet you. I don't want to pull out my
It
phone.
wouldn't have been a Blockbuster.
No, there's another movie that they were in together.
I thought it was Nighthawks.
That might have been it. And it's like, I don't want to use my phone because I don't want to grab. It's this. I'm going to see something I shouldn't see, and I'm like, I won't be able to take credit for figuring this out. If I
thought it was Nighthawks. I mean,
I don't think you'll figure it out because I danced around it, but you guys didn't take any bait or take a bite on it. I said things a couple of times. I mentioned their long lists of accomplishments outside of their martial arts, outside of their philanthropy, because I said that wasn't the connection, outside of film and television. Did
they all have a cereal? Because I'm pretty sure Chuck Norris did, and I know Mr. T did.
I know Mr. T did, but it's the connection's not cereal, but it certainly could be, I suppose. I did not look up to see whether Hulk Hogan or Chuck Norris had a cereal.
Did they all have a video game?
That was one of them, but that's one of the close connections. That's one of the minor connections, because Hulk Hogan and Chuck Norris both had video games. Chuck Norris had a game released on the Commodore 64, like old school kind of a game. Mr. T never had a video game unless it was in his character involved in something else, but he had a dedicated video game that never got released.
Got it.
But that is a minor connection.
So I gotta say, I'm stumped. If it's a connection, I'm guessing it's one I don't actually know. Like, this one might actually be one of those times where I didn't know that.
This is one, and Chris, you may not have seen it, but I did a social media post about this at some point, maybe a year ago. It was a pretty popular post for me as well. John's rocking his brain. They all three had
all the Calvin Klein models or something in the 80s.
Well, they are very prolific. It's television. There's something in television. I'll give you that hint. Something in television. Something in their television list of things. And there were small things, crossovers. You know, they both, Hulk Hogan, Mr. T, were on Saturday Night Live together. There was multiple of those things, but they all had something specific.
Did they all do an after-school special?
No, I suppose they could have. They were all very, let's teach kids a lesson. You know, let's teach kids good things. And they did this a lot through television with a certain vehicle, like for kids.
They all had Saturday morning cartoons?
They all had cartoons.
Yeah.
They had cartoons. That's it. Chris,
I didn't.
Oh, God, okay. So I need a little pressed.
This is one I wouldn't have known. I don't think I've ever seen a Hulk Hogan cartoon. I don't think I even was it Mr. T had his own cartoon?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, that one I think I do remember seeing a promo for. And then Chuck Norris, absolutely, I had no clue.
I think
Chuck Norris and the Karate Commandos.
Karate
nothing.
Commandos. Yeah. With a K. Karate K Commando. Karate
K Commandos with a K, yes.
I'm seeing a comic book page right now in my mind, and I could look it up, and I bet you it's with Mr. T as a cartoon and Alvin and the Chipmunks on one side of him and the Smurfs on the other. I literally can remember, I think it was NBC promo for his cartoon. The other two, I had no idea.
Oh, well, then you wouldn't have got it anyway. But you got all those other small little things, John, that threaded their way through all of it. The philanthropy, the working with children, even, them having songs. Two of them had songs that were for kids. Hulk Hogan himself appeared in 2 episodes of Walker, Texas Ranger.
It's talk about a reveal that could have been not only one topic of one of our podcasts, but on its own would stand for an hour to talk about, and it's Saturday morning cartoons. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are very few analogies for Gen X that I think ring as true as the fact that we basically were the Saturday morning cartoon generation. We didn't have the opportunity to stream cartoons whenever we felt like it. There wasn't a lot of programming in general dedicated to us. We had a certain amount of hours once a week that was dedicated just to us. And I don't know about you two, but I don't think I remember my parents being anywhere in line of sight. I'd get up in the morning. For me, it was 8 o'clock. Super Friends came on. That was my first. If I overslept and missed it, I remember being crushed. But it's literally get straight out of bed, grab the Afghan off the couch, take my spot on the floor, and maybe I've got a bowl of cereal, whether it's Mr. T's or Chuck Norris's, grab a pillow, and just turn the TV on and literally inches from the television set for the next 4 hours. And every single year when new cartoons would be released, it was that excitement of what are they going to bring to us. And it was just probably the best. I mean, I love playing outside. There's a lot of Saturday morning cartoons was just a memory that sticks with me forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember through the week then in the summer on a rainy day, it was always the game shows. Those started at 8 o'clock in the morning and they lasted until noon. So if it was a rainy day, that was what you did on a rainy day or a sick day at school.
Yeah, the Saturday morning cartoons thing again goes back to like how well today obviously they package celebrity brands or musician brands very well also, but a little bit of a different level. Like they're putting their name on designer clothing, or they have their own, actually, something like that. But I'd be hard pressed to see some of the people today having their own cartoon. The characters are so big. I think that's my point. Like, Chuck Norris is such a big personality. Mr. T, Hulk Hogan, they were these huge personalities. To think that they could be a cartoon or a cartoon character, of course.
They were a cartoon character in real life. Mr. T was a cartoon. Hulk Hogan was a cartoon.
Yeah.
Chuck Norris maybe a little less so, but I mean the antics he pulled in his movies were those were that wasn't reality. But I will say by the time Mr. T came along, I don't remember Chuck Norris's, I don't remember Hulk Hogan's, but by the time even those cartoons were hour-long commercials or 30-minute commercials, and I feel they lost something then, because then it was a brand, and then they were very explicitly trying to sell us something. But the cartoons before those, when literal legislation prevented them from couching or pretending commercials or anything other than they were, those cartoons are the ones that hold true to my heart. The Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Hour, those the Super Friends will forever be like my favorite. And they became toys after, but that wasn't the intent of the cartoon.
Yeah.
But, and, to take it a step further, part of I had talked a lot about personal branding and about how Chuck Norris has the jokes as a part of his brand now, and he embraced that. And, Hulk Hogan and Mr. T, their own branding. To be iconic enough to get your own, even a cartoon show, and a video game, those kind of things, you don't see a lot of that now, where you get something because you're that big. I don't think Stallone had he might have had a Rocky game, you know what I mean? But their own selves, they had games, they had cartoons, they had things that were designed, action figures even, designed for kids. I know there was Hulk Hogan and I know Mr. T. I'm sure there's a Chuck Norris action figure out there somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how big you are. That's how much people know you.
Yeah, and we had to, the other thing that people forget is in this day and age, like, we have so much access to the people that are in pop culture via social media. I mean, the pictures, the images, all of those things, it's right in front of us all the time. If we want to look up XYZ person, we just Google them, and we've got, back in the 80s, we had to wait. We've talked about this before. We had to wait for the magazine to come in the mail to be able to see, like, if it was, Teen Beat or Tiger Beat or People magazine. My mom got People all the time, and I'd flip through it. This was one of the opportunities for us, even though it was a cartoon, of course, to be able to see one of those characters that maybe we hadn't seen in a couple of years because their last movie was 1980 and it's 1982, and we haven't seen them for a while, and suddenly they pop up on a cartoon, and it's exciting because if we're invested in that character or that brand or that actor, well, we want to see them, but we couldn't see them like at the tip of our fingertips. We couldn't just, it wasn't that instant gratification.
It's also funny that the cartoons were a path along the journey. So, very rarely did the cartoon precede fame. It was really towards the end of it. Like, you can't, like Happy Days. I remember there was a Happy Days cartoon. There was a Partridge Family cartoon. There was a Star Trek cartoon. There were all these cartoons that came after their live action series. There was a Brady Bunch kids cartoon. Like, when you no longer had the oomph to push out that huge blockbuster movie or to be in that 8 o'clock prime time slot, well, you can still do voiceovers on your cartoon, so that was like the next step along your journey into what would eventually become either reality TV or just complete obscurity. You're gone.
Yeah, and none of these guys are gone. That's for sure.
No, that's what I mean. They bucked the trend.
Yeah. They definitely beat that Hollywood. Because there's people right now.
But to be fair, they're not pushing out that 8 p.m. time slot on TV, nor are they Blockbuster. But it still allows them to continue on. Like Henry Winkler led the Happy Days cartoon. And he's still around, but it's not what they once were. It's still a path along that journey.
But they're so pop culture relevant, and they will be long after they're gone. When you say the name Hulk Hogan, Chuck Norris, Mr. T, everybody knows who they are. I mean, it's rare to find somebody who you'd say, like, I don't know who Mr. T is. I don't know who Chuck Norris. I'm not talking about your 12-year-olds.
Well, and that's kind of what I was going to say. I'm like, you're like everyone. And I will take the other side of it and say they aren't the names they were to us, though. It is fading, but the fading isn't a bad thing. It means it's all that much more important to us, to our age group, to those of us that want to look back and see it. But yeah, anyone under, I would even say 20, not 12-year-old, 20-year-olds. I made an A reference in the Fonz based on something we did on the podcast, and nobody under 30 knew what the hell I was doing.
I guess my point is, like, 2 years from now, you think of all the people that have gone through pop culture over the decades. And if you pick the 80s and early 90s and you say all the people that were run through pop culture, you'd be hard-pressed to say that Hulk Hogan, Mr. T, and Chuck Norris aren't in that top echelon of pop culture icons that if somebody said, give me the top 15 pop culture icons from the 80s.
True, I would absolutely. I mean, Chuck Norris a little less for me, but yeah, no, your point is well made.
Yeah. Chuck Norris is more, I would argue that even though Hulk Hogan and Mr. T are more ingrained in pop culture, that Chuck Norris has been more lasting.
Yeah,
because
I would agree.
To Chelle's point, the jokes, the little, I mean, again, it was almost 20 years ago, but Dodgeball, I can't believe it was that long ago.
Yeah.
But Dodgeball, I mean, he was still relevant then. Like, he pops up and everybody's like, Chuck Norris. I want to, with Saturday morning cartoons really quickly, because my favorite was the Laugh Olympics. And we got them like twice a year. And it was all the Saturday morning cartoon characters, and they would be in the Olympics on little teams playing each other on a Thursday night at 8:00 in the off season when they were doing repeats. There weren't new episodes of Magnum PI or whatever it was. They would have the Laugh Olympics with Jabberjaw and the Wonder Twins and, all these, like, so it was the popular ones like Scooby-Doo, but the obscure ones like Blue Falcon, I think was one, and Dino Dog or something. And they would
Wonder
all
Dog.
be Wonder Dog. Thank you.
Wonder Dog. Yeah.
Yeah. And they would all be on these different teams with the Laugh Olympics.
No, Dynamite.
Dynamite. I think that was Dynamite. Blue Falcon and Dynamite. Yeah, that's it.
That is not ringing a bell for me.
No,
Well,
Wonder Dog
Dynamite.
was Marvin,
Wonder
Wendy, Marvin, Wendy, and Wonder Dog, and then it was Blue Falcon and Dynamite.
Yeah.
That
And
I knew Wonder-
Jabberjaw? Does Jabberjaw ring a bell?
Yes,
Jabberjaw.
Jabberjaw does ring a
Jabba,
bell.
jabba, 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 Jaws.
Yeah, I do. I remember. I like that one.
Speed Buggy.
Oh, Speed Buggy was like a Scooby-Doo ripoff.
Yes.
Really?
Rum, rum,
Yeah.
rum. Yeah,
Looked just like, yeah.
There were so many of those characters, though. Like, there was a few shows that ripped off that look from Scooby-Doo for sure.
Well, we don't want to get John all fired up and start talking about Scrappy-Doo.
Well,
I hate
it's funny you
Scrappy-Doo.
said that Scooby-Doo, though.
Did I tell
because
you
they
I
were-
hate Scrappy-Doo?
Yes.
I mentioned that? I hate Scrappy-Doo.
I
Little
love
fucker.
Scrappy.
Hate him. Ruined
Well,
the show.
It was funny that you mentioned the Scooby-Doo because they equated Mr. T's cartoon with, solving Scooby-Doo style mysteries. That's one of the things that he did on his cartoon was solve little mysteries. And then he would get on and give the kids some sort of a life lesson about, how to be a better person, how not to be a bully. And that thread actually runs through all three of them as well. So, I honestly, both of you, I give you both like a full point on this because you got the little threads and you got the big, and it took a hit, but that's okay. You got the big thread through it as well, what was in my mind. But I would love to ask, for anybody listening to this or actually watching it on YouTube, I would love to ask the audience because I found so many tiny connections. There's no way I could know them all. If they remember any other connections between them, between Hulk Hogan, between Mr. T and Chuck Norris, some other thread that ran through, maybe a wrestling event that Chuck Norris attended and it featuring Mr. T and Hulk Hogan, so I'd love our audience to give us some feedback on that.
I love it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of all three of them. They represent a time for me in my life where there was so much kind of wonderment every day. And I think about, a summer day feeling like it lasted forever. And I was out with my friends exploring in the woods and, we wanted to be those guys. Like we wanted to be Chuck Norris and Mr. T and Hulk Hogan. Like we watched everything and consumed everything that they did, and then we tried to replicate it, as kids are known to do. And typically we hurt ourselves or each other trying to do some of the things that they did, but still it was awesome. I mean, we would jump off a little roof onto a mattress trying to be wrestlers like Hulk Hogan, and so it was a great 3 topics for me. It made me like go way back. It was awesome.
It reminds you of your childhood and it puts you in the place of being that boy. For me, it didn't do that, but, put you in that place of being that boy who had an iconic person that they looked up to that was strong, kind, all the things wrapped up into one, and for me, mostly Mr. T embodies that the most, but still big, strong, and still nice and still willing to teach lessons. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It made me create a movie that doesn't exist. I looked to see Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone, and I looked everywhere. It's not there. I thought there was some. Okay. I don't know what the hell I was looking at. But to be fair, Expendables 2 that you said was just new and is out was 2012.
Okay, shut up.
14 years ago.
Okay, shut up. Okay, I don't know how old it. Oh, that means Expendables 1 is even.
Yes,
older.
Which means that would have been in Blockbuster.
Really?
And even Chris is like, what?
2012, there may have been a Blockbuster around even then. There's a chance I might have seen it.
2 was 2012?
That's what it just
Maybe
said.
it's Expendables 3 I'm thinking of, because didn't they come
No,
out
it's 2. They were both in 2.
But I mean, maybe it's 3 that came out recently.
Maybe.
I don't know. Yeah. 14 years.
Yeah. I gotta say, I never would have gotten it. You could have given me another 3 hours and I wouldn't have gotten it. Not because it's a bad connection. It's just one I didn't know. And it's just falls into that pattern of things that now I'm glad I do know, because that's a piece of pop culture that I didn't know and now I do. And I'm going to go check out Chuck Norris and the Kid Commandos, or whatever it was. Karate Commandos.
And Mr. T, and then Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling, it was called.
And I love the connection, as I said before, because it just took me back to being a kid, running around in the woods, pretending I was in a war with Chuck Norris, and wanting to be Mr. T and Hulk Hogan, and having all those, the wrestling matches and doing the fake fights and all that stuff.
And I give you both full wins on this episode. Full wins. You both got a ton of connections, whether they were small,
charity.
large.
I don't need your charity. I didn't get it. I'm big. No participation trophies allowed on this podcast. We didn't get it. It's okay.
It is written down.
I get half a point.
You get nothing.
You'll get nothing and like it.
No soup for you.
You know that one, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You'll get nothing.
Well, listen, as always, I had a blast. I hope our listeners continue to like, follow, comment, share, and do all the good things. Subscribe. This is Gen X Jono, a.k.a. John Catrides, signing off, saying have a great day, everybody, and see you next week.
See you next week.
Stay rad, everybody.